Welcome to the Clutch Kitten Gaming Podcast, where I play an indie game for 5 hours and let you know whether or not it's worth your time and money. Hello and welcome everyone. This is James, also known as Clutch Kitten, and I am so excited because today I am not alone. I am joined by Arnaldo, who's also known as Arnie. Arnie, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you, James?
Dude, I am doing so well because you have joined me on the podcast. What I'm so excited about is, if you don't know Arnie already, he is one of the hosts on the Region Free Gamers podcast, which I'm excited to get into more later. And the way we kind of hooked up or hung out was you were out in my neck of the woods recently, and we were able to get a beer together in Portland, Oregon. So, and it's crazy because you're all the way across the country. So that was an amazing experience.
I know it was really cool. You're actually one of the first people that I've in the Instagram gamer community that I've met up with in real life, aside from my co-host. So that was interesting. I really enjoyed like being able to do that.
Yeah, dude. I always love going to grab a beer, and it was very interesting meeting with someone who is a podcaster and a gamer, and I think you're the first person I've met up with as well who does both of those things.
Yeah.
As a hobby and kind of as a part-time gig. So that was super awesome. So just so our audience gets to know you a little bit better, let's just start out kind of easy. Who are you today, Arnie?
I mean, I think you pretty much summed me up, right? Podcaster, gamer, all around miscreant,
all around miscreant.
Yeah, it really is. At this point in my life, I think it's mostly work and play, you know? Like I'm trying to achieve that ultimate work-life balance. But because I started doing this podcast, like so much of what I do now revolves around it. Because if I'm not doing the social media stuff, then I'm researching or I'm writing or I'm playing stuff that is either directly related to the podcast or I hope will in the future be related to the podcast. So it's really become like a focal point in my life now, but I really enjoy it. Like I don't want it to sound like I'm complaining.
That's so awesome. We started the podcast you started it a little bit earlier than mine, but we both started it last year. And I think it's interesting talking with someone who's kind of going along a similar journey. I feel like,
yeah,
like everything becomes a little bit more steeped in gaming, and you do all the Instagram stuff for your podcast. And so we can definitely relate on both of those fronts.
Yeah, for sure.
Are there any other things besides gaming that you're really into, or is it mostly just like work, and then gaming as much as you can and podcasting? Or do you have other hobbies that you kind of also fill in the blanks there?
I definitely have other hobbies, but it's sort of been, and I don't know if this has been your journey, but throughout my adult life, like hobbies have sort of ebbed and flowed. Like sometimes gaming is top priority. Sometimes like I really enjoy watching movies and I really enjoy like anime and stuff like that. So sometimes that'll sort of be on the front burner for a while. I was a big board gamer for a long time. Like I really enjoy some of that stuff. I've done some role playing stuff. So all that stuff I really enjoy, but it really is like depending on the stage in my life, which one was sort of at the forefront and which ones were, sort of secondary. So gaming is now the number one. And I think it's been that way for a while. And having the podcast has sort of like pushed it even further up my list of things.
That totally makes sense. So as someone who hasn't watched a ton of anime, where is a good place to start? I know about Crunchyroll. I've watched a little bit of DBZ, but that's pretty much the extent of my anime experience.
Yeah, that's a tough question for me because I'm not a huge anime person. But for me, somebody asking me that is like, if I want to get into movies, like which movies should I start with? And I'm just like, it depends on so many things. But I can tell you some of my favorites for sure.
Yeah.
Like recently, I don't do the Crunchyroll. I like anime, but getting into something that specific, like I feel like it would drain all of my free time if I just had unlimited access. So I mostly do Hulu, that has a pretty good anime selection, and Netflix. recently, the ones I've watched that I've enjoyed, there was one called Violet Evergarden on Netflix. That was a really good anime. And then from like my childhood, my favorites have always been like the sort of 90s ish, early 2000s anime. Like that aesthetic has always been some of my favorite things ever. So I was a really big DBZ fan growing up. I liked Yu Yu Hakusho and Rurouni Kenshin. Those are more those three are like action, like sort of shonen stuff. And then as far as like more dramatic stuff goes, I like sort of slice of life stuff. There's this one anime that I always recommend to everybody that I think you would like. It's called Beck Mongolian Chop Squad. It's an anime about a kid who wants to start a band. Like he wants to be a guitar player.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's a really like little fun, sort of funny slice of life anime about this kid who's growing up and like meeting these people and starting his band. So that's a really good one. And then there's another one called Welcome to the NHK, which I always recommend to people, which is comedy ish. It's really off the wall, but it's the main story is about this guy who is, I think the first arc of the anime, if I remember correctly, is he's trying to develop. He gets like sucked into his neighbor's plot to like develop a dating sim video game, and then it sort of evolves from there because he meets this girl and she sort of comes into his life and tries to change him because he's a shut in. Like he doesn't go out, he doesn't do anything really because the anime like goes a lot into it, and I don't want to spoil any of it, which is why I'm
Okay.
being a little vague. But it
Yeah.
goes to some crazy places that I really enjoyed when I was growing up.
Based on the name alone, it sounds like a crazy show, so I might have to check that one out. Have you watched is it the Castlevania show that Netflix put out? I don't know if
Yes.
that is that an okay, question. Is that actually anime or is it just an animated show about Castlevania?
Um.
I I'm super naive in this. So
Yeah.
would
See,
you
you're putting. I'm gonna step into it. I'm sure. I would say it is anime, but some people get really into like what is anime, what isn't anime. For my money, I think it is anime. I believe it was animated by a Japanese studio. You know what? I'm not even gonna say that because I feel like I'm gonna get in trouble with somebody.
It's all right. You know a lot more than I do because I honestly have no idea. It's like I feel like maybe anime is one of those things you know it if you see it, but I haven't watched that show yet, so I don't fully know it, but I've heard lots of good things about it.
Yeah,
So, who knows?
it was really fun. Like especially getting into it now that they've, because I think when they initially put out the first batch of episodes, it
Mhm.
felt a little incomplete. Like it sort of ended on that cliffhanger because you knew they were going to make more. And then when they put out the second part, they sort of finished it off, and it was nice. I enjoyed watching it. I'm hopeful that they make more. Throughout the years, Netflix has toyed with all sorts of shows that people always talk about. Like I know at one point they were talking about a Legend of Zelda like live action series, or maybe it was an anime series. I can't remember, but I know there's been multiple rumors about that. There's been rumors about all sorts of shows that people are always like, "Oh, is this getting made?" And then it never happens.
How do you feel about the whole gaming and Netflix and Hulu kind of combined because we're getting a Witcher show soon, I
Oh yeah,
think.
that's right.
And yeah, like how do you feel about these kind of mashups of mediums? Do those interest you or is it just kind of like, whatever, like I hope it's good.
Yeah, it just depends. Like it depends on how invested I am in the property that's getting made. Like Witcher, for example, I have very limited interaction with Witcher
Mm,
as
yeah.
a video game property, but I mean I'd love to watch it. I think especially for video games, like anime, not just anime, but like making it into another medium like a movie or a TV show or something is a good way of maybe introducing people who aren't necessarily interested in video games to these types of stories. My perfect example of that is I'm a big fan of the Persona series, like the RPG series. And
Yeah.
I've met more than one person who is like, I really want to play this because I hear it's super cool, but I just don't have like 80 hours to invest
Oh my
into a
gosh.
game, you know?
Yeah.
And to those people, I'm always like, just, you know, if you can't play the game, like at least experience the story. Like go watch the 26 episode anime. It's not going to be, in my opinion, is not as good just because there's something, at least in the case of Persona, like playing the game and interacting with the characters and doing all that stuff is sort of what draws you in and what makes you so attached to the characters by the end of the game. And I don't think you get that in a passive medium like animation or like watching movies and stuff. But rather than not experience it, I'd rather they watch the show and sort of get a little taste of what it is. And if that tempts them to go and finally play the game and experience that, then that's all the better, I say.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree. I didn't even know there was an anime for Persona.
Yeah,
That's
Persona 4 has one and Persona 5
okay.
does as well.
Man, I've been wanting to play Persona 5 so bad, and I was so frustrated when they were teasing a Persona 5 thing for Switch, and then it ended up being
It's a
I forgot the
Mosu
type
game,
of
right? It's
game.
like a
Yeah,
Fire Emblem
Mosu game.
Warriors or something.
Yeah, you guys actually talked about this on the show,
I
and
know.
I mean, I'm sure it'll be a cool thing,
Yeah.
but I want Persona 5 on the Switch because I don't have it. Is it on PS Vita and all
It's
that sort of
on
stuff?
so Persona 5 I think is just PS No, it's on PS4 and PS3 actually.
Okay,
And I can't remember if there's a PC version. I get so confused now because I feel like
there's not.
oh, there isn't. Okay.
Unless I have completely missed it, and in that case, I will be kicking myself for the next few
No, I
days. I
think you're
don't think
right.
there is.
I think I was thinking of Yakuza. Yakuza has
Oh,
gotten
yeah, yeah, yeah.
PC ports.
Yep. So, before we keep going on gaming, tell me about you said you were also pretty into tabletop gaming as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some tabletop games that you really enjoy?
My tastes are all over the place, but I think my favorite that I've played at least long form is probably Betrayal at House on the Hill.
Oh,
I
yeah.
really like that game because I like I like something that you can play multiple times and has sort of that variant quality where even if you know the game and even if you're really good at it and you've played it a bunch of times, if there's something in like some mechanic in the game that can still surprise you and throw you off and make it so even as a skilled player or somebody who's played it a bunch, you're just as like uncomfortable as somebody who's playing it for the first time. I like that because I think
Yeah.
it makes it easier to introduce games to people when they don't feel like they're immediately out of their depth. You know what I mean?
That is a super good point because there's lots of times where I'll play a game that I've played multiple times with someone new,
Mm,
and there is that sense of like, if it's one of those games that's truly just skill based and there's not a lot of RNG,
yeah.
then you feel like they're at a disadvantage for the game. And it's like, I'm worried that they're not going to be having as much fun. And it might take an entire game for them to truly learn the rules.
Yeah.
And so that's cool. I've heard lots of good things about Betrayal House on the Hill, but I still haven't played it. So that's a cool thing to hear because games like that I feel like are kind of few and far between.
Yeah. So that was because I recently moved, but when I was living back in Virginia, which is where I was living before I'm where I'm living now, which is Rhode Island, I had a group of people who would get together and play board games on a weekly basis. And we would play all sorts of stuff. But like there was a game, the one I can think of off the top of my head is Terraforming Mars. I don't know if you've ever played
Yes,
Terraforming
I
Mars.
have it. Yeah.
And I like Terraforming Mars. I think Terraforming Mars is a really cool game. But Terraforming Mars was always one where even after I had played one or two games, whenever we would start playing it, I would always feel like I was under the gun and I was never like I never felt like I was actually being competitive because I was playing with people who had like optimal strategies for playing and like had preferred like companies that they wanted to be and already knew what they were going for like right at the beginning of the game, whereas I was more like I guess I'm going to feel this out a little bit and see what happens.
I 100% agree because that's pretty much just a card-based game,
Yeah.
and if you're playing it a lot, you get to know all the cards
Mhm.
super well, and yeah, I completely agree because we don't play it very often, and I feel like I'm coming to a new game every time I come back to it,
Yeah.
just because I haven't played it for so long, so I can see the difficulty there.
Yeah, but with House on Haunted Hill, I mean Betrayal at House on the Hill. Since you said you haven't played it, the mechanic there is pretty much whoever you play as. There's a book of scenarios that
Mhm.
comes with the game. I think it's like I'll say it's like at least 50. It's probably more than that, but it's at least 50 different ones. And the way that it works is at some point somebody is going to trigger a scenario event, and depending on the item that's being drawn at the time and the number of dice, I think, or the person who rolls to activate the scenario event, you look in the scenario book and then it'll reveal who the traitor is amongst the players, but you won't know that
Oh,
until it happens. And so it could end up that like the person with the most gear and the most powerful stuff all of a sudden is like the traitor, and the rest of the people have to defeat him somehow. Or it could turn out that nobody's the traitor and there's just a monster. Or it could turn out that there's multiple traitors. Like there's a bunch of like different stuff in the scenario booklet that you could play
yeah.
that game tens of times and probably not run into the same scenario twice.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I've started to enjoy more games like that where there are multiple scenarios. Like I've been playing Gloomhaven with a couple of
I
friends.
like Gloomhaven.
That one's it's kind of like the mixture of dungeon crawling and RPG game and well, I guess RP role playing game.
Yeah.
It's like a it's like a combination of those, and you're running a new scenario every time. And even though a lot of the mechanics are still the same, it's fun to have the change up of that, and you don't know exactly what to expect.
Yeah, and I'm a big sucker for co-op stuff.
Yeah,
Like anything that we like Pandemic is another one that I
yeah.
really enjoyed when I played it. Anything that's cooperative, I really enjoy. Like anything that's us against the game, I usually find a little bit more enjoyable. And I think it's because I like the sort of strategizing aspect, like discussing moves amongst people
Hmm.
and sort of sharing in the joy of victory or
Yeah.
wallowing in the taste of defeat, like together.
Yeah, I completely agree. Those are a lot of fun. And it makes it so if you're with someone who isn't a competitive person, at least you know they'll probably have fun, or at least if you fail, you're all going to be in the same boat. So it's
Exactly.
not like one person feeling crappy for the rest of the night or anything like that.
Yeah.
So we are still technically a video games podcast. So let's
You could just
scoot,
cut all this.
we'll scoot back back in that direction. Something I want to know about you, Arnaldo, is where did your gaming journey start? I think this is always so fascinating. And so where did it start, and how has it brought you to where you're at currently? Someone who's an avid gamer and someone who podcasts about games.
I feel like my journey had a couple of stops and starts. There's two major ones that I can think of. Like if you're talking about what are the first games I played,
Hmm.
that I vividly remember when I was about 4 or 5. My mom got me a Super Nintendo,
Nice.
and I remember the two big games I played on it all the time were Aladdin and Super Mario World. Those were the two like classics that I had.
Hmm.
And then as I grew up, I sort of was always like, even if it was peripherally, like games were always a part of my life. The other big moment I remember was my uncle gifted me a Game Boy Color with Pokemon Blue and Super Mario Brothers Deluxe, I think it's called. And that was another like, then when Pokemon sort of came into my life, I that was the thing I would play always. I remember being, because Pokemon sort of hit at the perfect time for me. I was born in 91. So when Pokemon came out in 98, I was 6 or 7 years old. So it was like I was going to elementary school and everybody was playing Pokemon. Like there are kids, when you went out to recess, there were some kids in the corner who had their trading cards out and were trading and battling and doing all that stuff. There were kids with their Game Boys just playing and linked together and trading and doing all sorts of stuff. Like people watched the anime, so you could always talk to somebody about Pokemon. Pokemon was pervasive. So Pokemon, I think, is probably the genesis of like being like, oh, gaming is a thing that I share with people, that I interact with other people about. Like it's not just something I do in my room and on my Super Nintendo. And then the point, I think, when I really became the gamer I am today, because I'm a big RPG guy. Like that's been the genre that I've always been most attracted to.
Hmm.
And I think I've told the story on our podcast before. Is I remember being in Toys R Us. I must have been like 10 or 11 years old, and my mom was like, "You can get one PlayStation game," and I ended up getting The Legend of Dragoon, and that game has, to this day, is probably my favorite or second favorite game of all time. And I don't think I've told this story before, but there's this is like emblematic to me of like gaming in general for me. Is I remember I got the game and I played and I played and I played and I played, and that's a 4 disc game.
Oh my word.
So I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna have this game forever. And so I played and I played and I played a few hours on disc one, and eventually I got to a castle, and I was like, I don't know what to do, because I was like, I checked all the rooms and nothing happened. And I was like, what is happening? Like, what? And I went outside and I went back to the dungeons and there's nothing. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? And this was just at the time, like, I didn't have access to a computer at this time, so I couldn't even check the internet.
Yeah.
And I don't even think there was like, even if I could have been on the internet, I don't think I would have known where to look for something like this. So I remember I was like, I got so frustrated, I turned the game off, and I didn't come back to it for, I want to say, at least like a couple
Oh
years.
my gosh.
And so a couple years later, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to play this game. I remember really enjoying it. And I got to the same part, and I was just like, again, I was like, I don't know what to do here. And all of a sudden I like went into like a corner of the geometry, and there was a staircase there that I had never seen before.
Oh my gosh.
And I go up the staircase and it triggers a cutscene, and I'm like, this is what I was supposed to do like 2 years ago.
Oh my word. That's
But I was
crazy.
so like, I don't know if it was like I couldn't tell where the staircase was, or I couldn't tell if it was a staircase, but I just felt so stupid. But then I like immediately started playing it again, and I beat it, like, you know, like I played up until like the last disc, and then I stopped again for some reason. I don't remember why. And then eventually when I was in like high school, me and a friend of mine played it together and we finally beat it. So that was like, that game was with me for, 10 plus years of my life before I actually completed it.
That's so interesting that you stopped and then came back years later like that. I don't know, that's just insane. And you found that staircase. Wow.
I think that was the point. I may not have realized it then, but I was just like, this is something that I like cared about. I thought about it a lot. Like, it was really like, I still remember everything about this. And I think at some point when I was getting older, like, when I started being on Instagram and started talking to other people about games, and when we finally started this podcast, I was like, there's a real like, people have such close attachments to these games, like their experiences. And at least in my case, I was like, I put so much time into this one thing,
Hmm.
and it's something that I think for a lot of people would just be like, oh, like, why do you remember that? But it was so impactful on me for some reason. And that's why I've always thought of games as a little bit more than like movies or TV shows or
Yeah.
anime or books or anything, because it's something you sort of exert yourself on. Like, you have a direct impact on what happens. The story does not continue without you.
Yeah.
Like, you have to actually input those things. You have to build your characters up. You have to, conquer the obstacles to move forward. And that's what I thought was like, it's crazy how that stuff just stuck in my mind for so long. And I like, those are some cherished memories for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting how games have such a tie to distinct memories. Like I remember for me, for Super Mario World, I used to play at my friend's house. That was like one memory that sticks in my mind. But also,
Yeah.
we used to go to this cabin up on a mountain that's a few hours away, and they had this tiny little TV. And I remember playing Super Mario World with my brother, once a year for a few hours, and we would just try to play as much as we could. And it's just like all these little memories that stick in your mind because you're interacting with the game, interacting with a sibling or a friend,
Hmm.
and that is something amazing about video games as opposed to other forms of media.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And that's why I really, like, a few years ago when I started listening to podcasts, like, that's what I was attracted to, was like podcasts where people would talk about, forms of media like this, like remembering stuff, talking about like their personal experiences with it. It's always, I don't know, it's very, I don't know if it's like a sort of voyeurish thing where I like pretending like I'm in the room and I sort of imagine like the games that they're talking about and how cool it must have been to have played them when they came out, and like when you're sort of forming, what kinds of games you like. But it's always felt really interesting to hear people, like yourself and like other people, talk about games and playing them and experiencing them, and what their opinions are on them, negative, positive, whatever.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we'll get more into your specific podcast later, but that's one thing I like about your podcast because all of you guys on there are older than me, and I know you're the youngest on your podcast, and
Yes.
there's all of this gaming knowledge and history that's just so fascinating to listen to. So as a follow-up to your gaming journey, so you played all these Super Nintendo games and art you got into RPGs, but where has gaming led to? Let me see if I can ask you that question. Where has where has gaming led you to kind of currently? Are you still stuck on the RPG train? Are you into action RPGs, JRPGs, or have you kind of shifted your focus for the gaming that you do currently?
I mean, I've definitely shifted my focus. I think I'm much more open to experiencing new types of games, and I think that's probably directly related to the fact that I now have the buying power. Like before it was
Yeah.
like I'm going to get this game and this is like the game that I'm going to have for like 6 months, a year or whatever, so I better make it like one that I know I'm going to like. So there was no time to mess around with other stuff, like new experiences were for the games that people like gifted me. Like if somebody gifted me something that I'd never played before, I'm like, cool, I get to like see what this is about. But when it was my turn to be like, you pick a game, it
Hmm.
was gonna be something that I was comfortable with. So now I'm much more open to playing all sorts of types of games. And I think as a result of the podcast, I've also been forced to play more types of games because we sort of the way we sort of pick topics is, somebody will pick a topic, and even if you haven't played that game yourself, it's sort of incumbent upon you to at least do some research on it, or read up on it a little bit so you can contribute to the conversation. So there's been a few times where I'm like, man, I've never played this game, I've never even really thought about playing this game, but if I happen to have it, or I can get it, let's pop it in, let's see what it's all about.
Yeah.
But it's mostly, I mean, RPGs are still like my bread and butter, like that's number one what I would pick to play over everything else.
Hmm.
But as I've gotten older, I've definitely like I have favorites in multiple genres for sure.
So today, what would you say your favorite RPG is, or is it still what you had played as a kid?
No, it changes every day.
So
It
today,
really
okay,
does.
today.
Like I'm not trying to be vague.
No, you're
But
good.
today it would probably be Persona 4 is my
Okay.
my favorite RPG ever, and I think my favorite game ever.
What about Persona? Because I know there's such a huge following around those games, but what about it as someone who hasn't played them?
It was, for me at least, it really was like when I played it. Because I played it the summer before college, like right after I had graduated high school.
Mhm.
And, those games follow high school kids. And the way the game plays out, I'd never played an RPG like that where you sort of, a key mechanic in those games is you get to know like specific people in
Mhm.
your party, and also people that you interact with for other reasons. So there's a social system to it where every time you interact with one of these characters in like specific scenarios, you get to learn a little bit more about them and they open themselves up to you.
Mhm.
And I've never played an RPG where I got so invested in the characters outside of my character.
Hmm. Yeah.
And some of I mean, there's a lot of themes to that game, and those themes like really resonated with me, like youth not being accepted, like sort of discovering who you truly are, things like that. Like that sound really sappy, but the way the game frames it is was very impactful on me at that time, because I feel like I was sort of in a big transition period where I was like, I've just finished high school, I'm about to start, you know this new phase of my life that's a little scary, because I don't know, like, I don't really know what I want to do. I don't know what I want to be. Like, what is all this stuff? I want to enjoy the time I have, but I know that it's sort of, like time is moving way too quick for me now. And Persona 4 was sort of my anchor at that point, where I could, just sit down, play the game, sort of get into the story, get into these characters, sort of be invested in their futures instead of mine for a little bit. So that's what really hooked me into that. That's why I was so enamored with it. And I've played it again since then,
Mhm.
and it holds up. I think it's one of the, I don't want to say one of the few, because there are a bunch of games that are still good even years afterwards, but I rarely play RPGs more than once because the time commitment is just so
Oh
intense.
yeah.
But I have played Persona 4 more than once. And I've showed it to friends of mine, and it's a game that I'm always like, if you like gaming, like you need to at least try it because I feel like it's
Mhm.
different enough and it gives you something that a lot of RPGs won't. And it has a story that's worth being told and is worth being experienced in that way.
Yeah, man, I'm so jealous you've played it twice because I haven't played it once, and I know that I need to. It seems like such a good game, and that's I was about to ask you if you've played it since, but you have, and that's cool that it still holds up, but that it was also impactful to you at the time you
Yeah.
first played it, and it kinda spoke to you then.
Yeah. The way I would say it is like, I think I'll enjoy it every time I play it, but it'll never be the same as the first time I played it.
So, Persona 4 is, like, one of the most impactful games, but
Mhm.
what are you currently playing? What's a game that I know you play a lot of older games, but are you currently playing an older game, or what are you
I
currently
wish we
gaming
had
with?
done this interview like 2 weeks ago, so I could seem a lot more interesting than I am right now.
No,
Because
it's great.
I'm currently playing Persona 5 Dancing is what I'm playing right now.
What?
It's not a lot
What
of variety in my wheelhouse at the moment.
what is
Um,
Persona 5 dancing? Oh my gosh.
so the Persona games have gotten due to popularity and how like people really enjoy them. They've gotten a number of spin-offs. So Persona Q is one
Mhm.
that's sort of. Have you ever played Etrian Odyssey?
I haven't, no.
Okay, so it's sort of Persona in the style of Etrian Odyssey. So it's like a dungeon crawler more so
Okay.
than a straightforward JRPG.
Mhm.
And then Persona Dancing is a rhythm game with the characters of Persona.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Cool.
that's what I'm playing right now because I got it on sale at Amazon. But before that, I was playing something more interesting. I was playing Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. I finished
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was playing Super Paper Mario. I was playing
And these were both for the show you guys did recently, right?
so we're planning an episode. I think we're planning an episode on Paper Mario for the
Okay.
future.
But
But
you did talk okay, okay, it must have been about something else, but I remember you talking, I think with Paul about
oh yes,
Paper
yes, yes.
Mario.
We had done a one of our what have you been playing lately's,
Yes,
and I had
okay.
been playing Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. I just finished it,
Gotcha.
and then what else am I playing? I usually try to have like a handheld game and a console game going at the same time.
Okay.
Oh, I know. I for something we're doing in the future, I started playing Metal Gear Solid, which I had
Ooh,
never played before. The
I
first Metal Gear Solid game.
nice. I like it. I've not played those, but I've heard amazing things, and I was listening to a podcast recently with I think it was
Mm.
Giant Bombcast, and they were doing this game where it was, like, quotes from Metal Gear Solid and quotes from this political candidate that is currently out, and, like, guess who said what, and it was hilarious, and it made me want to play that game so badly, but
uh,
that's awesome. So
it's
oh, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say like that. That seems like a perfect game
Yes.
for that for Metal Gear specifically because it gets so insane. Like even as somebody who hasn't played the series, I know enough about it
Mhm.
to know that it's completely off the walls.
It's ridiculous. So, shifting off games that you're obviously good at, you're an RPG veteran. What is a genre of games that you cannot seem to get good at?
Rhythm games more than anything, really.
And you're still playing a rhythm game. So, you like
I
them,
know
but you
I'm
just
playing it
are
on
not
easy
good.
though
Okay.
because I suck.
Okay. What about it is hard?
I don't. I honestly I think I'm devoid of rhythm. I like I. It's funny because one of the games I played the most when I was early in college, and yeah, like when I was in my first 2 or 3 years of college, I loved playing Rock Band and
Mhm.
Rock Band 2. Like Rock Band 2 was my jam. But even then, I was like, I played bass because you didn't have to hit two notes at a time. And I also did the singing because it was like as long as you could hold a note,
Yeah.
it wasn't that hard. Um, but I'm just like I don't know. I get overwhelmed very easily. Like I can follow one thing, two things, but once you start giving me like you know four notes like scaled up where you have to hit each one successively and
Yeah.
like it's all coming down at like a million miles an hour, my brain like stops working. And then sports games probably I'm also terrible at.
Okay, I can't blame you for that. That's definitely understandable. Have you gotten to play Beat Saber at all, by any chance?
I have not, but everybody I've talked to has told me that it's great. Every video I've seen of it looks amazing. I really want to try it, but I think I don't know. I've never had motion sickness
Yeah.
from VR. Like I've never had that issue, but Beat Saber seems really intense.
Dude, I was gonna say I'm curious how you would like that game because for me it was kind of cool because
Mhm.
you're meshing the rhythm game with the movement, and I don't know,
Yeah.
it made the experience so kinetic and interesting, and but yeah, I didn't get sick from it, but I didn't play it for super long. So
I think I would like it because I think part of the reason I really liked Rock Band and stuff like that,
mhm.
even though people hate it, like look back on it as like, what the hell were people thinking, like buying all these plastic instruments and all that
Yeah.
stuff. But having the instrument, like having a facsimile of a real instrument in your hands, sort of made it a little easier for me to visualize myself playing it and sort of figuring out like the rhythm to stuff and the timing for hitting notes and whatnot,
Yeah,
as opposed to just having a controller in my hands.
even though there's probably those all those instruments are probably ruining our world from being
Oh
thrown
yeah.
into trash, like that game was brilliant and it was awesome. I mean, it was a huge period of time where that was like the huge thing.
Yeah. I never even got to play Rock Band 3 and they put a keyboard in that one.
Oh
I
my
was like,
word.
what the hell?
Imagine if every child who was like expert level at Rock Band had just bought an actual guitar. How many more bands we'd have today?
Well, they tried. I don't know if you remember this, but they tried doing that. There was a game called Rocksmith, I think is what it was called,
Oh, I vaguely remember this.
and that one I don't remember if it's like there was an actual guitar controller or you used a real guitar. I don't remember, but that one was like you essentially learn how to play real guitar. Like it
Oh.
does the six strings and like it shows you how to strum and stuff like that. So they tried to do like a more realistic version of it,
Mhm.
but I think what you do then is you cut out all the people that are just like drunk at parties and
Yeah.
want to play Don't Stop Believing at like midnight, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's such a great party game, and maybe even though it wasn't real guitar, maybe it inspired lots of people to become musicians after that too. Who
Yeah.
knows?
I mean, for somebody like me, the appeal of it was, I'm never gonna learn how to play Rise Against on guitar or on bass.
Yeah.
But if I can play the song I like on this Rock Band controller and feel like a badass doing it, like I'll pay for that.
Hell yeah, man. That's awesome. So, as someone who you evaluate games as part of podcasting, that's whether or not you're reviewing games, you're at least kind of evaluating what you like and dislike about games. So,
Mhm.
what is it that you find most important for you, at least in a game? Like, what elements, whether it's narrative, mechanics, atmosphere, anything like that? Like, what's most important for you, and why do you think it's most important?
It's a tough question. My stock answer is for me, storytelling and atmosphere are king. Like I feel like I'm more willing to deal with like mediocre to bad controls for a good story than I would be to play a game that's maybe more fun that has a terrible story that I'm just not interested in.
Yeah.
Um, because if a game has if the only thing drawing me to the game is the control and the mechanics, the like those would have to be so fun
Yep.
that I'm willing to put up with, the constant interruption to that to deal with the cutscenes, the story, the voice acting, whatever it is. But if there's a narrative hook that really gets me, like I will deal with your subpar control as long as it's not broken. Like
Yeah.
if I
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
can't progress, then I'm like whatever. But if it's not bad enough that I can't keep progressing, then
Mhm.
I'll keep playing it if I want to see where the story is going.
I'm 100% agree with you. I recently the last two episodes I've played two games,
Hmm.
Clatter and When Ski Lifts Go Wrong, and I liked When Ski Lifts Go Wrong, but both of those games had next to no narrative, and even though they're much more Clatter's like a turn-based tactics game, and when
Mhm.
Ski Lifts Goes Wrong is kind of one of those like bridge building type games. And
Okay.
even though they're both very much mechanically focused, one of my biggest complaints was that there was just no narrative, not even like a narrative background to the world. And it's amazing how much of a difference just a simple like page of text that you can read that says this is where you're at, or these are the characters, or whatever it is, even if it's a very mechanically focused game. It's
Mhm.
amazing how much just a little bit of narrative can kind of be the glue to hold those mechanics together.
Yeah. I mean, just a tiny blurb, like you said, like even a page just telling me who am I, why am I doing this, what's the goal, like what am I trying to achieve? I think I'm saying this a lot, but I think it's also to do, at least for me, with where I am now as a gamer,
Hmm.
in that when I was younger and I had infinite time and I could sit and play and do whatever I wanted, like I really liked games that were just like a loot. Like I can't tell you how many hours I spent playing like Roller Coaster Tycoon 2
Yeah.
or The Sims or you know stuff like that. So it's just like a gameplay loop.
Hmm.
There's no real end to the game. You just sort of play as long as you want for, the enjoyment of playing and experiencing all that. But now that I'm older and I have a lot more games and a lot less time and a podcast and sort of going out and work and all these other things that are pulling me away from this stuff,
Hmm.
I'm like, I have very little patience for games that like waste my time.
Yeah, totally.
As soon as I'm like, if I'm like an hour or two in and I'm just like, I'm not feeling this, I'm not afraid to like just dump a game completely. And I feel like I've run into this like a lot where where I'll stop playing something and people are like, oh no, it's good after like X amount of time, and I'm like, you've already lost me. Like I don't have 10 hours to spend to make this game better.
Dude, you just have to put 20 hours into the game. It's like, what,
No way.
what the fuck, dude? Like 20 hours? That's insane.
No
Like
way.
almost a whole day. Yeah. No, time is worth a lot. And if you're not into a game after a couple hours, that's why for this podcast, I was like, okay, I can guarantee that I can put 5 hours into a game each week.
Yeah.
And if I don't like a game by 5 hours, especially indie games, which are mostly small, it's like, if I'm not enjoying it by then, I think I'll have a good idea.
Oh
You don't
yeah.
have to go that far in. Well, maybe in like RPGs that are 100 hours long, maybe that I'm trying to think of the right word. Maybe it makes more sense to play 10 hours of that to see if you like it, but even then that's so much time. That's a lot of commitment to do that.
Yeah, I mean, my whole I've got a blanket policy. I'm like, I don't care if your game's 30 minutes long or 200 hours long. If I have to spend 2 or 3 hours being miserable,
Hmm.
I'm gonna stop playing this game.
Yeah. No, I can
I don't
respect
care
that.
if it becomes the greatest game of all time after 15 hours. That means I had to put up with all this for 15 hours to get to that point.
Yep. So, since we're talking about some elements of games that are important and that are good and bad, this is the part of the podcast where you, Arnie, you have the opportunity to create your own dream game. You can get
Oh
rid
god.
of all of that junk and create a game that will take over the nation with popularity, just like Persona 5. So,
Oh no.
yeah. so so you have to give me a character, a weapon, or if you want this to be a pacifist game, you can do
Mhm.
like a watering can. A location, a genre, and if you want to do a soundtrack, then tell us the soundtrack. But what is your dream mashup game?
Okay, so I gotta start with a character, right? Does it like is it an original character or do I just like can I pick a character from a game or something?
Yeah, yeah. So use these from games that are already out there, or
Okay,
if you really want to do an original character, feel free. But this
yeah.
you can take elements from other games.
Okay, so for a character, it's weird. I think for the game I'm gonna do, I want to do like let's do Link
Okay.
because I normally don't like silent characters, especially in RPGs, because I get what people are trying to do, like have you project yourself onto that character. But I'm just like, I'd rather have an interesting character that I can explore and like can interact with the people around him. But since the next thing is genre, you said, right?
Yeah, you can go to genre. Do whatever
Oh,
order.
what's the next one?
Weapon. It's character,
Weapon.
weapon, location, genre, soundtrack. But you can mix and match.
Okay. Character, link, weapon, weapon.
It can be any weapon in the gaming universe as
See,
well.
this is why this is tough,
It
because
is.
I think he has a really cool weapon, but I want to give him something else. I'm gonna give him Cloud's Buster Sword.
Hell yeah. I like it.
Okay, and then location. Location. Um, you know, there was I recently played. You played Valhalla recently. I recently played 2064 Read Only Memories,
Okay.
and that was a game that I really enjoyed, like the setting and the graphical style for, where it was like Neo San Francisco. So I think something like that, like maybe a futuristic Hyrule,
Dude, that would be cool.
like a cyberpunky Hyrule.
Yeah.
And then you said genre,
Hmm.
and this is the one where I'm like, if I'm making a game, I'm gonna make something that's not so complicated. So I'm not gonna say RPG. I'm gonna go beat 'em up, because I do love me some good beat 'em ups.
I like it.
And then what was the last one?
If you have a soundtrack that you think would be perfect for this game, what would it be? What soundtrack?
For something like this, I think I'd probably go like maybe Streets of Rage, like Streets of Rage 2, maybe
Okay.
like something sort of electronic-y.
That would be good for the futuristic Hyrule. That would be
I
sweet.
hope I'm thinking of the right game, because otherwise one of my co-hosts is gonna yell at me.
I don't know the soundtrack for Streets of Rage, so I'll just believe
Yeah.
you, and then your co-host can yell at you and make fun of you
That's a
later.
good point.
Yeah.
But no, the guy who did the soundtrack for Streets of Rage, Yuzo Koshiro, I like the kind of music he did for like Genesis. Like he
Mhm.
really got a lot out of that sound chip. So I think if he's doing the music for it, then it's gonna be good.
That would be awesome, dude. I really like the idea of putting Link in a futuristic setting. Maybe Nintendo is listening right now and you'll inspire the next Breath of the Wild to be futuristic Hyrule instead of
Well, then I
like
hope that, can I say my address on here so they can send my royalty check?
Yeah. As long as they send it to both of us, we'll be good. Yeah. I like it.
I think the next Breath of the Wild is supposed to be like super dark.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, and yeah, I guess that's kind of what the trailer seemed like. Did you
Yeah.
play the? Have you gotten to play the first Breath of the Wild yet?
No, this is a big point of contention on our podcast, is that I still don't own a Switch.
That's right.
And my excuse is that, so Nintendo, when they revealed the Switch, one of the first games they announced was going to come out was Shin Megami Tensei 5. They said it was in development, but
And it's
that
not
was
out yet.
like, when did the Switch come out? Like 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, it's two. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think 2
And
years.
they've never mentioned it again, so I am out of my I have a grudge
Yeah.
that until they tell me when it's coming out, I'm not buying their Switch.
So, question: how do you feel about the Switch Lite? And also, by the way, if you end up getting a normal Switch, at least now they're upgrading the battery. So,
I know that's the other thing, is I've always been fairly I'm gonna say cheap. I think cheap is the right descriptor for me, but I don't usually jump into consoles right away, because I usually wait until a better version comes out, so then I can
yeah,
get the older version for cheap. Or if the better version has like significant upgrades, I'll get the better version when it comes out.
that's completely fair. I don't blame you for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just feel like, especially in the initial run of consoles, there's always something that goes wrong.
Oh yeah.
Like whether it's the Ring of Death, I know the Switch, people were having issues with it, like scratching the screen when you would dock it initially. I know I had a friend whose Switch, like, I don't know if it was overheating or what, but it, like, you could noticeably see that it was like warped a little bit, like it
Ooh,
had bent.
that's not good.
So stuff like that, I'm always like, I feel like I'd rather wait a little bit for them to work the kinks out and then grab the one that's at least like better constructed.
Are you interested in getting the Switch Lite at all, or are you waiting for? I'm not going to pronounce that name right. Are you waiting? Let's be honest. Are you waiting for that game to come out? Are you going to stay strong to your grudge, or are you going to give in to the inevitable wave of Switch?
I think I will give in, honestly. I think that I will buy it before too long. Like, it's
Mhm.
getting to the point where there are enough games on that platform. Like, not even counting like the indie stuff and the digital stuff you can get, there's enough like first party Nintendo games on that platform that I want to play, that I'm like, I'm gonna have to cave and buy one of these already. With regards to the Switch Lite, you know, I like I don't have a problem with it. Nintendo is obviously trying to make something that's different from the Switch, so it's obviously not going to have, you know, the detachable Joy-Cons, the docking features and stuff like that, because it's supposed to be its own thing. It's not just like a reinvention of what they already have.
Hmm.
It's a dedicated portable version of the Switch. So in that sense, I don't have a problem with it. I think I personally won't be getting it, because I think what it is, it's an entry point for people who may be on the fence about spending $300 to get a Switch. So they just want to spend $200 to dip their toe in and see how they feel about it. Maybe it's for moms who want to get it for their kid. Maybe it's for people who know they're just going to play in portable mode and don't care about, you know, playing on their TV, since the Switch is, you know, not as powerful as the other major consoles. Maybe they're like, I'll use my PS4 to play games on my TV or my Xbox One, and I'll just have my Switch Lite for, you know, when I want to be on the go, when I have to go to the airport, you know, for travel and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mentioned this on the podcast, but I think for me, it's like, it's a good option for
Mm-hmm.
having a second Switch in the house, but it's not like, if I was getting into buying a Switch right now and I didn't have one, I probably would still go with the basic Switch, because
Oh yeah.
not having the docking functionality, if it's your only Switch, is just, I don't know. It's one of those things, like, even if you don't have a TV or if you don't use your TV much, it's just nice to have that option.
And I think, you know, the having the detachable Joy Cons is a problem for certain games. I think, like, not being like, that was one thing I really liked about the Switch, is like not just having it portable, but if I can, because this one doesn't have a kickstand either. So I'm like, one of the things I thought was really cool is like, oh, if I have Mario Kart 8 Deluxe or whatever, and I'm outside and I have a friend with me, I can kickstand it and he can take one Joy-Con, I can take the other Joy-Con, and we can play.
Yeah,
So that's cool. Like, I would buy the Switch because I feel like I would use a lot of those functions. Like, I would really want all of that to be available to me. But if you're more, you know, like if you don't think you're going to use it as much, and you only want it as like a dedicated handheld, like, it's $100 cheaper. You can get it in maybe a color that you like better than the
true.
Switch Gray. So I don't think it's a bad move, but I don't think it's for everyone, obviously.
Yep. So now that we know quite a bit more about you, Arnie, I actually want to hear some about the podcast you're on, Region Free Gamers. So, um, and I'm sure some of the listeners would be interested as well. As someone who listens to way too many podcasts, yours is one of the ones that I have on my loop now. So tell us some about the origins of Region Free Gamers podcast, and also what's kind of the main goal of the show for you and the other hosts.
The origin is pretty simple. We've definitely talked about it before, but there's nothing like super crazy. I joined Instagram, I want to say like December 2006, 2016, not 2006. Jesus, I'm not that. I'm not an early adopter. And just sort of through posting and talking to people, I met, you know, the other people who host the show with me, and we sort of got together. We initially just started chatting on Instagram, like back and forth about games and whatnot. And eventually one of us was like, hey, would you guys be interested in doing a podcast? And we were like, why not? Like, we're already spending so much time like typing away on our phones talking about all these video games. Why not record it, see if people like it,
Yeah,
and, you know, put it up there? So originally the idea was, I think it was mainly just for us, really. Like, we just wanted to be able to talk to each other about this stuff, but we thought it'd be fun to record it and make it into its own thing. If people listened to it, that'd be great. If people didn't, we didn't really care, because it was more so like a weekly excuse for us to get together and talk about video games.
totally. Yeah.
But when we started like that, so to answer your question, like, I think that was the goal, at least for me initially, was just like, I want to be able to sit down with these people who I've gotten to know and I consider friends, to just talk about video games. Like, I didn't really have people around me at that time who were big into video games or who enjoy playing video games. So Instagram was sort of my way to find other people who had similar interests. And that's what the show became. But then when we started doing it and we released it, we actually did get some people like following it, becoming interested in it. You know, it's funny for something that I don't think we might have been super serious about in the beginning. At least I my impression was that, you know, we were gonna try to put out good product. We didn't want to put out a bad show, but if it didn't take off, it wasn't going to be the end of the world. But you know, the other guys on the show, Paul specifically, who does most of our editing, and Ozzy as well, they just sort of refined the whole thing. They took our ramblings, they sort of cut them into a very listenable product and added like little flares, like, you know, bumper music and stuff like that. That when I heard that first episode, I was like, wow, this turned out a lot better than I thought it was going to.
Yeah,
Especially for me, because I had never done anything like this. I'm not a very good speaker. I say like and obviously a lot.
I'm with you.
But it turned out really good. And as we kept it going, like people just started following us. I think part of it was that the other guys had been on Instagram longer than I had, and they were friends with people and they knew people. So they started following us. But then as we kept going, like people just started really appreciating the quality of the show. And then as it started evolving, because I lied to you earlier, I said that the main goal was to talk. And that is true. But there was another goal that I completely forgot about, and I shouldn't have, because it's the whole premise of the show.
We'll
which
cut
is
that whole other part out. Don't worry. We're good.
Which was basically that when we were talking about stuff, we had all come from very different backgrounds. So, you know, I'm the youngest and I'm 28. So that should, you know, it ranges, I think, by a few years. Each one of us are, you know, progressively older.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had very, very different experiences, and we found that out as soon as we started talking. But then we also realized, like, this Instagram community is so international. Like, we talk to people from, you know, England, Japan, South America, Europe, Australia, Canada, like all sorts of places, like anywhere you can think of. You're like, wouldn't it be cool if we could bring those people onto our show and sort of open up communication amongst gamers like that? Like, everybody has different experiences depending on where they come from. It's shaped by your age, you know, what you grew up playing, where you're from, things like that. So we were really interested in exploring the sort of differences amongst gamers from all sorts of different parts of the world.
I was gonna say that's super super cool. I when I first heard about kind of the meaning behind the name, the Region Free Gamers podcast, it was cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's so true, because gaming is something that brings people together literally from across the world, and it's something that all these different people from different cultures and different backgrounds can they can all be passionate about this same thing, and that's
Yeah.
awesome.
You know, we were lucky in that because the other guys knew people were willing to come on the show even before we had proven ourselves. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
I think our first, if I'm not mistaken, our first maybe 3 or 4 episodes, we don't have any guests on, because in our mind, we were like, we need to put out enough of this show in enough good quality that when we ask somebody to be on it and they, you know, inevitably turn around and listen to our show to see if they want to be on it, they're not horrified at like the cluster that we've created. Um, but we were lucky enough that we had relationships with people, some of them like pretty big, you know, people in the Instagram community that were willing to give us a shot and sort of come on, make our show better, really, by sort of giving us their time. And sometimes the one of the biggest problems with this whole thing has always been scheduling, because you're talking different time zones for probably every host and also guests. So we've been very lucky in that, you know, if we tell somebody this is when we usually record and that's like 10 p.m. your time, like, are you okay with that? And they're like, yes. Or it's like 6 a.m. their time. They're like, don't worry about it. Like, we've just been like very lucky in that people have been willing to work with us as well.
Yeah. One of the guests that you guys had on has been Mr. Dennis Strillinger.
Yep.
Hopefully I pronounced that right. Himself, Strilly Vanilli. And
Yep.
you've had on someone who works at Ubisoft Montreal. Is that right?
Yes,
Ubisoft,
Mike.
yeah. Mike. Yeah, I've listened to those, and yeah, that's so cool that you've had all these different guests on from different areas and kind of in different parts of the gaming industry. That's so cool.
Yeah, no, it's been a trip. It really, like, and this is not to sound corny or whatever, but when I started this, I was like, it'd be really cool if, we got to meet new people. Like, I get to talk to people about, their gaming experiences and all that stuff. And to say that I could have ever imagined that we'd be where we are now when we started is like, it's insanity to me. Like, and we're not even that big of a podcast. I don't want to make it
Hmm.
seem like we're, humongous or anything. But when we started out, it was like, if we can get 10 people listening to this, I'll be amazed.
Yeah.
And it's sort of slowly but surely, we've been pushing that boulder up the hill, and it's been working out for us. So I am immensely grateful, and I'm hoping and praying we got big things coming up, and we can get to more people that we've really wanted to talk to on the show. I think it's become more so of like, let's find people that we want to talk to. Getting like big name people is always awesome, and we really enjoy that. But I think more than anything, we really first and foremost want to talk to people that we know or want to get to know, and we think are interesting, and we hope that that sort of translates to the listener.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I that has drawn me to your show in particular is one, first and foremost, you guys all seem to really be having a good time when you record. It's a fun podcast to listen to, and that really makes a big difference, because if you go on a show and there's not cohesion between the hosts, or they don't seem like they're having fun, like what's the point in listening to that? So you
Yeah.
guys have that down well, and I think you said you're not that well spoken, but I think you are very well spoken on the show, and it's professional quality, especially when you give some of that poetry from Toronto that I listened to recently. But I really liked that aspect of your show, and I one thing I think I mentioned earlier, but I like how you guys aren't just another typical podcast where you're talking about all the current games, although that is a
Hmm.
valuable thing.
Yeah.
I think you guys have a cool perspective where you do talk about some current games, but you also just talk about a developer or a series of games like Paper Mario, or
Hmm.
some of these older games like Resident Evil, which obviously a new one came out recently, but
Yeah.
you're willing to talk about these different gaming themes that aren't just the current AAA games, you know? So I really
Yeah,
like
it's
that.
it's been that was something that I think we've always been. I don't even think that it's something we've tried to do on purpose, but I don't want to speak for the other guys, the other hosts, but for me it's always been like, I think that maybe it's been a detriment in that maybe if we did, sort of try to line up our episodes with like the next big release, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
oh, Luigi's Mansion 3 is coming out. Let's do a Luigi's Mansion or a Mario's Missing episode or whatever, like something that ties directly into new releases and stuff like that. Maybe we'd get more listeners, but for us it's always been first and foremost like, what do we want to talk about? What's
yeah,
like a topic that we think is interesting and we think could make for a good show? Because if we're not, if at least if one of us isn't passionate about what we're talking about, that's going to show
absolutely.
that's going to show through a lot. And I think I told you about this when we met up, but we've done episodes on Mario Brothers, on Advance Wars, on we just did a Fire Emblem episode, and the two biggest episodes that we've ever released are Grand Theft Auto Vice City and Phantasy Star for the Sega Master System. Like, there's no rhyme or reason to any of this.
Yeah,
Like, I feel like we could do the most popular game topic and people might not care as much as if we did some niche, genre piece that the people who played really, really love and want to hear more about because nobody talks about it. And the people who haven't played are like, oh, this is interesting. Like, it's not the 50th time I've heard about Ocarina of Time, or um, what's a popular game? I don't even know.
No, I totally get you because like I listen to at least 3 or 4 podcasts already that are about current games that are coming out or upcoming games, and it's like I as great as you guys are, it might attract me less honestly if all you guys talked about were the current games. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
you guys offer something so cool where it's a nice mixture, and I haven't played a lot of those games that you talk about, and it gives me a little bit of a glimpse into what those games were like or what those developers were like, and I think that's such a valuable thing, and it offers a lot to the listener.
What you've said is like that's what makes me the happiest is whenever I get like messages and stuff on the socials where somebody's like, I had never, I listened to this episode, I had never played this game, and now I'm interested in it. Or like it was fun to hear about it, and now I want to learn more, or I want to play, so and so game that you guys talked about. Like that's the kind of stuff that to me is like, wow. Even if something I said, even if it was something stupid and wrong or whatever, if it entertained someone, and if what the product we put out made them even a little bit curious about exploring some of these titles, like that's real tangible change. Like
Hmm.
that's an effect on somebody, and that stuff is nuts to me. Like that's the biggest like praise I could ever get.
Yeah, totally. I know you kind of touched on this already, but what would you say has been the most rewarding and the most challenging thing about being a host on the Region Free Gamers Pod?
As far as the rewarding part is so easy,
Hmm.
it's I get to do something I really enjoy for the most part. I get to do something I really enjoy. I get to talk to people that I really like. Like
Hmm.
I really enjoy getting to sit down and do these episodes with my co-hosts. I really love talking to all the guests that we've had on and getting to know like some of these people like I've gotten to know, I still talk to outside of the show, and just getting to put something out there that I'm proud of. Like I think we talked about this a little bit before, where I've always felt like I've had a creative drive or like creative energy that I want to put into something,
Hmm.
but I'm also a terrible editor and I'm very irresponsible. So whenever I would try to get projects off the ground, it just would never work. But having these other guys around me who sort of take that and mold it, and we work together to create this sort of refined product that people consume and enjoy, like that is by far the most rewarding thing about it. The fact that I can wake up and say, you know what are we going to talk about next? Like what am I going to get to research? Who am I going to get to talk to today? Like what have we got planned? Having seeing this thing come up from where it was to where it is now, like every day, just being like, wow, it's even the small things, like we got this many downloads today, we got this many new followers, I got to talk to this many people today. Like those small things just adding up over time is the most rewarding part of the whole experience.
Yeah.
As far as the challenges, like there's been quite a few. Like I said, scheduling is always a real issue. The stress of making sure that we always have enough episodes. I know when we started off, we had initially wanted to do. I think we had discussed at some point doing a weekly show, and immediately we were just like, that's unfeasible. So we do bi-weekly because the records are long, the editing takes a significant amount of time, and the other thing is, there's four of us, but we all have jobs, we all have lives. So if we were to release on a weekly schedule, we'd have to be so far ahead of the release schedule, because if something happens and three of us can't record, then there's no show. And consistency to us has always been the most important thing. Like there's nothing I hate more when I enjoy a podcast and I am really looking forward to it than for it not to be there on the day that it's supposed to be there.
Yes.
It makes people lose interest a lot. So that's just the most stressful part, is like making sure the records go well, the sound is good, the editing is done, the posts are all up, making sure that it posts correctly to all of our different social media things, all the podcatchers. Now we've got a website that we released very recently that we're still working on. So writing content for the website, putting all that stuff together, scheduling guests, making sure that we have topics lined up, researching, writing. Like, it's all stressful, but when it's all done and the episode comes out, even though I refuse to listen to any of the episodes because I don't want to listen to myself talk,
Yeah.
it's so rewarding. Like, just having it be like, because I know what went into that episode, right? Like,
Hmm.
everybody else just sees like an audio file on their feed or whatever, but I know what went into that from day one.
I can totally agree with that and totally relate to that, is what I mean.
Yeah.
Uh, Sometimes on this side of the mic and doing all the editing and or kind of preparing for the show, like that takes a lot of time and a lot of
Yeah.
effort. But at the end of the day, once you have that finished product, it feels really good. And yeah, just seeing those downloads come in and talking with people who listened, it's it's such a rewarding experience.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is an experience for you. Maybe we talked about this before. I keep saying that because we had a long ass
We
conversation.
did lots of beer.
But a lot of it too is self it's like self-imposed anxiety, like self-imposed obstacles. Like, for me specifically, like, I'm the youngest of the hosts, and so a lot of times, we're talking about stuff that I just don't know. Like, I haven't played, I haven't experienced, and I tend to shoot my mouth off about a lot of stuff, especially like in the heat of talking. And a lot of times I'm like, man, what did I say? Like, what kind of stupid shit just came out of my mouth? Like, I'm so worried that people are
Yeah.
going to get the episode and they're going to be like, wow, I can't believe you said this or blah, blah, da, 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 like all that. And then it comes out and I'm like worrying about it, worrying about it. And then it comes out and people are like, that was an amazing episode. I enjoyed every second of it. I loved it. I'm like, what the fuck
Mhm.
is wrong with me?
Are you not listening to the show? Yep.
Well, that's the thing too, is like I feel like a lot of creators get that sort of sense where they're like, because you see all the disparate parts, like you see all the individual parts, all the flaws in everything. Like, you're like, oh, maybe this doesn't sound as good as like this other one, or if you got something scripted, like which take sounds better, like does this one sound better, does that one sound better, should I rewrite this line, like, but once it all comes together and you see the final product, like, you realize that that one part you were so worried about is maybe like a 2-second part in a 2.5 hour episode.
Even though that one pop in the mic or the whatever it is at second 25.25, even though that drives you crazy, people usually aren't going to notice that stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm with you. So one last thing for you. What would you say is one of the weirdest pieces of gaming knowledge that you've picked up from your co-hosts, or like something that just stands out since they have a ton of a wealth of knowledge? What's been something that has really stood out to you as a weird or interesting piece of gaming knowledge?
Oh my god. Now you're making me think back. I will say we just put out a Fire Emblem episode, and my favorite piece of knowledge that I found in researching that was that Fire Emblem had a 2-episode anime in 1997.
Really?
That was Fire Emblem. I think the first game that was ever released outside of Japan was in 2003 ish, maybe 2002. But in 97, the actual first piece of Fire Emblem media that ever made it out of Japan was that 2-episode anime that got dubbed over here. And you can watch it on YouTube for free. And it
Oh.
is one of the best / worst things I've ever seen. And like, it has that anime
Okay.
aesthetic that I live for,
Yeah.
but everything else about it is like a beautiful dumpster fire. But from my co-host, I can't think of anything specific,
Yeah.
but I will say, like, there's just so many. Like, I think you had referred to when we do episodes about game developers, and I know we did one on Technosoft recently,
Yes.
and that was a game developer that I didn't even know what that was until they were like, oh, we should do this episode. So there's a lot of episodes where I'm just sitting and getting schooled, like, I have so much respect for those guys, like the amount of time and effort they put into not just the show, but they grew up sort of being heads, like they grew up being old school gamers, like always really into it. They have so much knowledge, whereas like I said, my journey was a little more stop start. So I've always felt very lucky to be a part of this project, because I think if there's one person who's the sort of disposable host, it'd probably be me.
Dude, I disagree, man. You bring a lot to the show from what I've heard, and I know you probably don't actually feel that way, but you do bring a ton to the show, and
Yeah.
I'm sure they would probably, I'm sure Paul and the rest of them would probably agree with me in that all the different perspectives are valuable to the experience, and even though they may have been just steeped in gaming for however many years, like your perspective matters and counts and is still important to the podcast.
Oh
So
yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to sound like uh what's the word I'm looking for? Like I'm not self-flagellating or something. Like I'm not trying to the show wouldn't be what it is without all of us. But I'm just saying like in terms of the raw knowledge and like the
yeah.
bringing that sort of factor to the table. I bring my own sort of vibe,
Hmm.
but in terms of that game knowledge and that sort of raw uncut like this is how it was to play those games at the time when they came out, like I was there firsthand, I lived it, that I
Hmm.
think is so interesting. Like for me it's like I remember experiencing some stuff, but there's a difference to me between having somebody tell you about something that they read or they may have heard about and something somebody tells you like I was there, like I remember the sounds of the arcade, the lights, the smells, the I put my hands on that cabinet, I remember like playing with other people, stuff like that. Like there's the details that come out just make you feel like you're there, and it's always really cool to me.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about this a lot when you came to Portland, but it's so interesting hearing your perspective on the podcast and all your thoughts from it. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us here.
Oh, thanks, man.
So Arnie, where can people find you, or where can people find the podcast?
So you can find me where you can find the podcast because I run all the social media stuff. So I'm in charge of all that. So you can find us. Let me list them off. First and foremost, regionfreegamers.com. We just launched it, and I would always encourage people to go there first because we write articles that you can't find anywhere else on that. You can find every single episode of the podcast. And we've also started linking to the music that we use on different episodes. So if you're interested in looking that up, like you can find all those links on the website just collected for you. You can also find us on Instagram at Region Free Gamers Podcast. We were initially Region Free Gamers, but somebody was like, I didn't even know you guys were a podcast. So we were like,
Yeah.
let's change that up real quick. And then Twitter, we're at Region Free Gamer because Twitter has a character limit on their ats. So Region Free Gamer on there, and then iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, all your favorite podcast apps. You can find the show and go give it a listen.
Nice. Yeah, I encourage anyone listening to this, definitely go check out their podcast. It's worth the listen, worth the time, and I'm sure you will not be disappointed.